My husband's sister wore white to my wedding. I let her have the spotlight, for exactly 10 minutes. My husband's sister arrived at my wedding in a white gown so similar to mine that, for one suspended second, even the photographer lowered his camera. Victoria stood at the entrance to the ballroom beneath an arch of ivory roses, wearing a fitted silk dress with a cathedral train, pearl buttons, and the same off-the-shoulder neckline she had watched me choose 8 months earlier. She had added a veil. Not a fascinator, not a pale shawl she could later pretend was champagne-colored, but a full veil that brushed the floor behind her. My mother-in-law went white beneath her makeup. My bridesmaids started toward me as if they expected to hold me back. Ethan whispered my name and reached for my hand. I did not cry, shout, or ask security to remove his sister. I looked at the clock above the ballroom doors, saw that it was 6:17, and told the coordinator to turn on the spotlight. Victoria wanted my wedding. I decided to let her have it, for exactly 10 minutes. The silence broke into the kind of nervous laughter people make when they witness something so rude that politeness offers no usable response. Victoria mistook it for admiration. She lifted her chin, adjusted the veil, and began walking toward the dance floor while 2 videographers followed her. They were not part of my wedding team. Their cameras carried the logo of VOW, the bridal lifestyle company Victoria had been promising to launch for almost a year. She paused halfway down the room so they could capture the train spreading behind her, then turned toward the long floral wall where my name and Ethan's had been displayed that morning. The names were gone. In their place, gold letters now read, Victoria White, a new way to become the bride. She smiled as though 200 guests had come to witness her unveiling. What she did not know was that the wall had been restored to its original lettering before the ceremony. The version she was posing in front of existed only on the ballroom's secondary projection screen, and everything happening under that spotlight was being saved to 3 separate recording systems. At 6:18, Victoria took the microphone from the bewildered bandleader and welcomed everyone to what she called a celebration of modern love. Ethan's fingers tightened around mine. For most of our relationship, his sister's behavior had been explained with soft words. Spirited, insecure, creative, intense. Those words had protected her from consequences while leaving everyone else responsible for absorbing the damage. I could feel him preparing to cross the floor, but I asked him to stay beside me. This was the first wedding decision we would make as husband and wife, and I needed him to trust that my stillness was not surrender. He looked at my face, then at the digital clock on the sound console, and understood. We had agreed on the 10 minutes that morning, after my attorney called with the final piece of evidence. Victoria had spent months constructing a stage. Removing her too soon would let her claim she had merely worn the wrong color and been attacked by a jealous bride. Letting her speak would show everyone what the dress was really for. At 6:19, she thanked several vendors by name and announced that the floral arrangements, champagne tower, custom stationery, and immersive reveal wall were preview experiences designed by VOW. The florist's mouth fell open. The stationer, seated with her wife near the back, quietly raised her phone and started recording. Victoria said she had personally selected every detail and negotiated every partnership. She described the room as her first complete bridal environment, built for women bold enough to reject traditional rules. She never mentioned that Ethan and I had paid for it, or that the vendors had been hired under contracts bearing my signature. She never mentioned that the ceremony had taken place an hour earlier in the garden, before she arrived, because the coordinator had moved it forward by 20 minutes after learning that someone had tried to alter the schedule. Instead, Victoria presented my reception as a sponsored demonstration. Every confident sentence tied her more tightly to emails she had spent the previous week denying. At 6:20, one of her videographers asked her to turn so the dress label would show. Victoria laughed and said the gown was the centerpiece of her debut collection, inspired by a bride who had been afraid to be unforgettable. Several guests looked toward me. She finally did too. Her expression carried the triumph of a person who had rehearsed my humiliation until it felt like a memory. She raised her glass and thanked me for providing the occasion. It was the closest she came to admitting I existed. My father began to stand, but my mother put a hand on his sleeve. I had told my parents only enough to keep them from intervening. Around us, people waited for a scene. Red wine thrown at silk, sisters-in-law screaming, a groom forced to choose between blood and marriage. Victoria depended on that reaction. A furious bride would become the villain in the edited video she planned to release the next morning. I smiled, lifted my own glass, and allowed the cameras to capture me listening. At 6:21, she introduced Marcus Bell, the investor she claimed was financing VOW's national launch. Marcus did not stand. He was a quiet man in his late 50s who owned the hotel, though Victoria appeared not to know that. She had met him twice and believed he represented a hospitality investment fund because that was how my attorney had described him in an email we knew she would access. Marcus remained seated beside the hotel's general counsel and watched Victoria announce that VOW had secured exclusive rights to reproduce the evening's design across 12 luxury properties. She claimed Marcus had authorized the use of the hotel's name and guest images in commercial campaigns. The general counsel wrote something on a legal pad. Victoria's smile widened. She believed his notes signaled interest. In reality, each claim added another documented misrepresentation to a file that already included forged releases, altered invoices, and unauthorized charges. At 6:22, Victoria invited my mother-in-law Diane onto the dance floor. Diane did not move. For years, she had rescued her daughter from debts, broken leases, abandoned jobs, and friendships Victoria destroyed once someone else received attention. She had called it keeping the peace. 6 months before the wedding, she had given Victoria temporary access to a family account so she could pay medical bills after claiming her insurance had lapsed. That access became the first opening in the scheme. Victoria used it to create a business card, pay a web developer, and make deposits to vendors she later portrayed as partners. When Diane discovered unusual transfers, Victoria told her they were wedding expenses Ethan had approved. Diane believed her because believing Victoria required less courage than confronting her. Now her daughter was asking her to step into a spotlight purchased partly with money taken from that account. Diane stared at the floor and shook her head. At 6:23, Victoria recovered by announcing a surprise engagement. Her boyfriend Caleb looked as startled as everyone else. They had been dating for 5 months, and according to the information he later gave my attorney, they had never discussed marriage seriously. Victoria held out her left hand. A large diamond ring flashed beneath the spotlight. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to Ethan's grandmother and disappeared from Diane's safe 3 weeks earlier. Victoria called it a family blessing and said she and Caleb intended to be the first couple married through the vow experience. Caleb did not approach her. He looked at Diane, then at Ethan, and seemed to understand from their faces that the ring had not been given. Victoria filled the silence by telling the room that some people waited for permission while others created destiny. Her videographers moved closer. The microphone captured every word. At 6:24, she announced that my photographer, band, florist, and venue had all agreed to provide services for her future wedding in exchange for promotional exposure. None of them had agreed. What they had received were emails from an address that resembled mine, complete with my standard signature block and references to private contract terms. The messages asked vendors to convert part of our paid packages into family brand consideration and threatened poor reviews if they refused. Some ignored the requests. Others, believing they came from me, had provided samples, additional labor, or partial refunds routed to a payment processor controlled by VOW. Victoria had counted on the confusion of wedding planning when dozens of deposits, revisions, and last-minute details made a few altered instructions difficult to notice. She also counted on my reputation. I was a commercial insurance broker known for reading contracts closely. If an email carried my name, people assumed I understood what I was signing. At 6:25, the ballroom doors closed. Not locked, no one was being detained, but closed quietly by hotel security so the hallway noise would not interrupt the recording. Victoria interpreted the movement as part of her production. She thanked the hotel for respecting her creative direction and announced a limited founding membership for brides who wanted access to preferred vendors. A QR code appeared on the projection wall behind her. It led to a site where guests could pay $500 for priority consultations. She said all payments were non-refundable because demand was overwhelming. The site had been copied and preserved the night before. Its terms listed my office address, my professional license number, and a limited liability company I did not own. The payment page claimed that every package was insured through my agency. That claim was not only false, it placed my license, clients, and career at risk. At 6:26, Ethan asked me if I was all right. I was not, but I was steady. There is a difference. My wedding reception had been interrupted by a woman wearing an imitation of my dress and using the room to sell a business built partly on my stolen identity. My new husband's family was watching its oldest pattern become public. My parents were watching me stand still while a stranger might have mistaken stillness for weakness. Yet, beneath the anger, I felt something unexpectedly clean. For months, every discovery had been private and deniable. Emails could be blamed on hackers. Transfers could be called misunderstandings. A missing ring could be misplaced. Now Victoria was standing under professional lights, claiming ownership of the exact decisions she had denied making. She was not being tricked into a confession. She was being allowed to tell the story she had planned. At 6:27, the 10th minute began. Victoria asked the room to raise their glasses to women who refused to disappear on someone else's special day. A few people lifted glasses out of confusion. Most did not. She turned toward me, expecting rage or defeat, and told the videographers to get my reaction. I looked at the sound technician. He nodded. The gold VOW logo vanished from the screen. The wall behind Victoria became black, and white numbers appeared in the center. 6:27 p.m. The spotlight remained on her for 3 more seconds, long enough for her smile to falter. Then, the ballroom's regular lights rose, the microphone in her hand went silent, and the screen changed to the original monogram, Claire and Ethan. Exactly 10 minutes after I told the coordinator to turn on the light, I walked onto the dance floor and took back my wedding. I did not make a speech about betrayal. I did not need to. Our attorney, Naomi Price, stepped forward from a table near the stage and introduced herself to Victoria. Beside Naomi stood the hotel's general counsel, the florist, the photographer, and a representative from my insurance firm's compliance department. Naomi explained in a calm voice that all commercial filming had been suspended, no guest had consented to advertising use, and the hotel prohibited unapproved solicitation. She handed Victoria a preservation notice requiring her not to delete recordings, emails, payment records, or account information related to VOW. The hotel counsel served separate notices concerning trademark misuse and false claims of partnership. My compliance director confirmed that my license number had been used without authorization and that the matter had already been reported. No one shouted. The absence of drama made the consequences feel heavier. Victoria stared at the papers, then laughed. It was the brittle laugh she used when reality failed to follow her script. She said the launch had been performance art, and everyone was proving her point about women policing other women. Naomi asked whether the ring on her hand was also performance art. Diane made a sound that seemed pulled from somewhere deep in her chest. Victoria covered the ring with her other hand. Caleb stepped away from her and told security he had believed it was a gift from the family. Victoria immediately called him disloyal. Then she looked at Ethan and ordered him to stop this. Not asked, ordered, with the confidence of a sister who had spent 30 years turning every crisis into a test of his love. Ethan walked onto the floor but stopped beside me. He said only that the reception was ours and she had to leave. Victoria's face changed more at that sentence than at the legal notices. She had expected him to negotiate, soften, or ask me to forgive her before the cake was cut. When they were children, he had been trained to restore calm after Victoria broke it. If she lost friends, he invited her into his group. If she spent rent money, he covered the shortage. If she insulted his partners, he explained that she felt threatened by change. I had watched him unlearn that reflex during our engagement, not perfectly and not without painful arguments. Standing beside me while his sister wore white was the final exam neither of us wanted. He passed it without raising his voice. Security asked Victoria's videographers to surrender the memory cards only after the hotel counsel showed them a clause in the filming permit they had signed under false project information. One complied immediately. The other tried to leave through the service corridor and was stopped, not by force, but by Marcus Bell, who informed him that the corridor entered a restricted operations area and the police had already been called regarding reported property theft. The mention of police transformed Victoria's defiance into panic. She insisted the ring had been promised to her. Diane finally spoke. She said it had not. The 2 words severed years of excuses. Victoria removed the ring slowly and placed it in Diane's palm, but the return did not erase the theft or the announcement recorded minutes earlier. She left at 6:36, 19 minutes after entering. The white train dragged through spilled champagne near the doorway. Nobody threw it. Nobody needed to. Caleb followed at a distance after telling Ethan he would cooperate and did not intend to go home with her. Diane remained seated, gripping the ring. My mother asked whether I wanted to cancel the reception. I looked around the room. The flowers were still beautiful. The band was still waiting. Our friends had traveled across the country. Ethan and I were married, and Victoria's 10 minutes did not deserve the remaining 4 hours. I asked the band to begin the song we had chosen for our entrance. The first notes were shaky because the pianist's hands were trembling, but by the chorus, the room had found its breath. To understand why I had been ready, you have to understand that Victoria's white dress was not a surprise. The exact design was, but the intention had been visible for months. I met her 2 years before the wedding, 3 weeks after Ethan and I began dating. She invited herself to dinner, arrived 40 minutes late, and spent the meal interviewing me as though she controlled admission to the family. She asked about my salary, previous relationships, fertility plans, and whether I expected Ethan to move away from Diane. When I declined to answer, she smiled and said privacy usually meant insecurity. Ethan apologized afterward. He said his sister had always been protective. I told him protection normally focused on danger, not control. It was our first disagreement about her and far from our last. Victoria was 3 years younger than Ethan, but behaved as if she had raised him. Their father left when Ethan was 12 and Victoria was 9. Diane worked 2 jobs, and Ethan became the reliable child. He packed lunches, checked homework, and learned to calm Victoria's storms before they disrupted their exhausted mother. Those habits followed them into adulthood. Victoria called him for flat tires, rent shortages, conflicts with managers, and breakups that always required midnight rescue. She also treated his girlfriends as temporary obstacles. One found her cosmetics thrown away during a family vacation. Another discovered Victoria had read private messages on Ethan's laptop. Ethan condemned each act, but accepted the apologies that arrived with tears and explanations about abandonment. By the time we met, he believed setting a boundary meant delivering a clear speech and then helping Victoria avoid the discomfort it caused. I saw the difference because my work involved risk. A policy without enforcement is not protection, it is decoration. I loved Ethan's patience, but I did not want to marry into a system where patience meant granting one person unlimited chances with everyone else's property. We spent a year in counseling before becoming engaged. That was not because our relationship was weak. It was because we wanted it strong enough to survive the family roles waiting for us. When Ethan proposed, Victoria congratulated us online before we told our closest friends. She posted a photograph of herself holding my hand so the ring was visible, then wrote that she had always known no woman would understand her brother the way she did, but was learning to share. Comments praised her generosity. The post received more attention than our eventual announcement. I asked her to remove the photograph until we spoke to my grandmother. She deleted it, then told Diane I had accused her of trying to steal the engagement. Diane called Ethan and urged him not to let wedding stress divide the family. We had been engaged for 4 hours. The first real warning came at the bridal boutique. I had invited Diane, my mother, and 2 close friends. Victoria arrived without being asked, carrying champagne and a small camera. She filmed herself reacting to dresses until the consultant told her recording was prohibited. When I chose a simple silk gown with pearl buttons and an off-the-shoulder neckline, Victoria became strangely quiet. She asked the designer's name, fabric type, production timeline, and whether the pattern was exclusive. The consultant answered only general questions. Later, Victoria said the dress was too restrained for the venue and suggested I wear something more supportive because cameras could be cruel. I recognized the insult but refused to perform hurt for her. 2 months later, she announced Vow. Her social media teaser described it as a luxury bridal platform combining planning, fashion, insurance, and venue access. The inclusion of insurance caught my attention. Victoria had never worked in insurance, hospitality, fashion, or event planning. Her employment history consisted of short roles in marketing, followed by longer explanations about toxic leadership. She told followers that Vow would eliminate predatory wedding contracts by using insider expertise. When I asked what expertise she meant, she said families should support ideas before interrogating them. Ethan told her she could not reference my company or clients. She accused him of withholding opportunities because I was threatened by her potential. For a while, nothing happened. Her website remained a countdown page. She attended bridal shows, posted mood boards, and described herself as a founder. Diane gave her money for branding photographs. Ethan and I focused on the wedding. We hired Juniper House Hotel, chose a garden ceremony and ballroom reception, and signed separate contracts with every vendor. Because of my profession, I kept a digital file containing invoices, certificates, payment confirmations, and change orders. I also created a dedicated email address for wedding business. That habit eventually saved us. The first discrepancy appeared in the florist's invoice. A credit of $6,000 had been issued for brand partnership conversion, reducing our floral installation and transferring part of the deposit to a sponsorship package. I had authorized no such change. The florist forwarded an email that appeared to come from our wedding address. It contained my name, phone number, and a sentence about supporting women-led businesses. The reply to address differed by 1 character. When I called Victoria, she sounded offended and said someone must be sabotaging VOW to make her look guilty. She knew about the florist credit before I mentioned the florist. Ethan wanted to confront her in person. Naomi advised us not to. She was my college roommate before becoming an attorney specializing in commercial disputes, and I asked her for help because the false email involved my professional identity. She told us to preserve evidence, change passwords, and contact each vendor independently. 3 more problems emerged. The stationer had refunded a premium print upgrade to an account we did not recognize. The photographer had received a release authorizing VOW to use our images. The hotel had been sent a request to replace our welcome sign with a collaborative activation. All carried versions of my signature. The transfers totaled just under $22,000, but the amount was not the worst part. Victoria was building credibility by attaching herself to established businesses. She used my license number in a draft VOW insurance certificate and listed Ethan as operations director without his knowledge. She presented Diane's family account as proof of capitalization. She had even copied a clause from one of my client agreements that promised claims advocacy through my agency. Had a bride paid VOW and suffered a loss, she might reasonably have believed my employer guaranteed the service. We notified my compliance department. They locked down public-facing information, sent preservation letters, and reported suspected identity misuse to regulators. Ethan froze his credit and discovered an application for a business card naming him as a guarantor. Diane initially refused to review her accounts. She said Victoria had probably made administrative mistakes while rushing toward launch. I asked whether she would use that explanation if the person involved were not her daughter. Diane cried and said I was turning the family into a courtroom. I told her Victoria had brought contracts into it first. The investigation might have remained private if Victoria had stopped. Instead, she escalated. She told relatives I had stolen the VOW concept and was threatening her with corporate lawyers. She claimed the florist partnership had been her idea, and I canceled it out of jealousy. Some relatives believed her because my career made me look powerful, and Victoria had perfected the role of gifted underdog. At a family lunch, an aunt suggested I let Victoria have this one little thing. I asked whether the little thing meant my signature, license, money, wedding photographs, or husband's credit. No one answered directly. Ethan's response changed after he saw the card application. He called Victoria, with Naomi listening, and asked whether she had used his information. Victoria denied it. He asked about the vendor emails. She denied those too. Then she said something she believed was persuasive. Once VOW succeeded, nobody would care how the first partnerships had been arranged. Ethan ended the call. For days afterward, he grieved as if someone had died. In a way, someone had. The sister he imagined existed beneath the emergencies, waiting for enough love to become accountable. We removed Victoria from the wedding party. She had never been a bridesmaid, but Diane had pressured us to give her a special reading and a seat at the head table. Ethan informed her in writing that she was invited only as a guest, could not film commercially, make announcements, alter decor, contact vendors, or wear white. The specificity felt absurd until she replied that dress codes designed to control women were oppressive. She did not promise to comply. Diane begged us not to revoke the invitation. She said exclusion would damage the family permanently. We agreed to let Victoria attend under the written conditions, partly for Diane and partly because Naomi wanted the boundaries documented. Then the bridal shop called. A sales associate had noticed someone using my name to request the designer specifications for my gown. The woman claimed she needed a replacement after losing weight. Security footage showed Victoria leaving with fabric samples. She had not obtained the original pattern, but she had photographed enough during my fitting to commission a close copy from an overseas workshop. When Naomi sent a formal notice, Victoria responded through a newly hired lawyer that any similarity between garments would be coincidental. That was when the white dress stopped being a family insult and became business evidence. Victoria planned to use my wedding as VOW's launch. Her contractor accidentally copied our coordinator on an equipment schedule showing 2 outside videographers, a projection takeover, a 10-minute founder presentation, and a bridal gown reveal timed for 6:17. She planned to enter after our ceremony, interrupt the reception, and record my reaction. The edit notes described me as traditional bride resistant to disruption. Her intended story was already written. Brave female founder challenges possessive bride, launches a new movement, and transforms a private event into a shared platform. My first instinct was to ban her from the property. Marcus Bell offered to place her photograph with security. Naomi agreed that exclusion was legally clean. Yet the evidence had a weakness. Victoria denied authorizing the contractor schedule. Her lawyer blamed an overenthusiastic freelance producer. The payment processor was registered through layers that did not carry her name. Vendor communications came from false addresses. Ethan's card application had been started but not completed. Diane's account transfers were labeled reimbursements. Victoria had designed enough distance to call every event a misunderstanding caused by supporters. Naomi proposed that we preserve the reception and let security stop any disruption. The idea of sacrificing even a minute of our wedding made me furious. Then I read the production schedule again. 10-minute founder presentation. Victoria needed an audience because attention was not merely emotional fuel, it was commercial proof. Her investor deck promised a filmed launch before 200 affluent guests at a luxury hotel. If we removed her at the door, she would release footage of security approaching a woman in white and sell herself as a censored innovator. If we allowed the presentation under controlled conditions, her own words could establish authorization, claims of partnership, possession of the ring, and intended commercial use. We did not decide lightly. Ethan worried I was turning my wedding into an investigation. I worried that avoiding confrontation would let the scheme follow us into our marriage. Our counselor asked a useful question. Which choice would we regret because it violated our values, not because it produced discomfort? I did not value a flawless performance of happiness. I valued reality, consent, and the right to keep what we had built. Ethan valued loyalty, but was learning that loyalty to a marriage sometimes required refusing the family's oldest demand. We chose to protect the ceremony, set a strict limit, and allow the reception plan to expose itself. Only 6 people knew the complete arrangement: Ethan, me, Naomi, Marcus, the coordinator, and the sound technician. The ceremony moved forward so Victoria could not interrupt our vows. Her outside team was allowed into a controlled equipment zone after presenting the falsified authorization, which the hotel copied. Their feed was routed through the house system, allowing the hotel to record it without displaying unauthorized material on the primary screens. The QR payment site was mirrored for evidence. Hotel counsel and my compliance director attended as guests. We did not invite police to stage an arrest. We reported the stolen ring and agreed they would come only if Diane confirmed it was taken or someone tried to destroy evidence. On the morning of the wedding, I expected to feel like an insurance investigator wearing a bridal robe. Instead, the ceremony made the scheme briefly disappear. My father cried when he saw me. My mother fastened a bracelet that had belonged to her mother. Ethan waited beneath old oak trees, and when I reached him, his face held no fear, only recognition. Our vows contained nothing about perfection. We promised truth without humiliation, boundaries without abandonment, and partnership without performance. Those promises mattered even more because his sister was somewhere nearby preparing a counterfeit version of the day. When the coordinator whispered after the ceremony that Victoria's team had checked in, Ethan asked whether I wanted to stop everything. I almost said yes. I could have protected the next hour by sending her away, but the problem would not disappear. It would return through litigation, family gossip, creditors, and customers who believed Vow was insured. I remembered the brides who had already paid founding memberships during a private presale. Naomi had found 9. They were strangers, but my name had been used to make their risk look safe. I told the coordinator to follow the plan. Those 10 minutes felt longer from inside them than any account can convey. Each second contained 2 weddings, the one Victoria was trying to steal, and the one Ethan and I were choosing not to surrender. Watching her wear my silhouette hurt. Hearing her call my restraint fear hurt more. But I also watched vendors realize they had not been dealing with me, saw Caleb understand the ring was stolen, and saw Diane confronted with a truth she could not soften without participating publicly. The spotlight did not make Victoria powerful. It made the hidden pattern visible. After she left, the reception became ours in a way it might never have been without the interruption. Guests did not spend the night whispering about a woman in white because the question had already been answered. She was not a confused relative or an eccentric guest. She had announced a commercial scheme and been removed from it. The band restarted. Ethan and I danced. My veil caught on his jacket button and we laughed so hard the photographer captured the first image from the day that later became my favorite. It was not elegant. My mouth was open, his forehead rested against mine, and neither of us was looking toward a camera. Diane left before dinner. She apologized to us in the corridor, but most of her words focused on shock. She could not believe Victoria had taken the ring, used the account, or planned the presentation. Ethan told her disbelief was no longer an action. She had bank statements, recordings, and years of smaller incidents. If she wanted a relationship with us, she would need to cooperate honestly and stop translating consequences into cruelty. Diane nodded, though I could see how difficult the instruction would be. Enabling had become her method of motherhood. Giving it up meant admitting how much damage her protection had protected. At 9:12, police interviewed Diane and collected the ring report. Victoria had already called them, claiming she was being held hostage at the hotel. Lobby cameras showed her leaving freely. Her false call did not improve her position. She later posted a photograph from a parking lot describing herself as the victim of an ambush engineered by a corporate bride. The post remained online for 43 minutes before her lawyer removed it. Screenshots preserved another admission. She called the event my official VOW launch and complained that I had stolen her footage. The next morning, instead of releasing a dramatic video, Ethan and I issued one short statement through Naomi. An unauthorized commercial presentation had interrupted our private reception. No vendor, venue, insurer, or guest had endorsed VOW. Evidence of identity misuse and financial irregularities had been referred to appropriate parties. We asked for privacy and provided a contact address for anyone who had paid the company. We did not mention the white dress. Photographs had already made that point more effectively than any adjective. 11 customers contacted Naomi within a week. Most had paid between $500 and $3,000 for consultations, venue holds, or insurance packages. Victoria had promised discounted access to hotels that had never heard of her. One bride believed her destination wedding deposit was protected by a cancellation policy carrying my agency's name. Another had provided passport copies for travel coordination. The case expanded from family theft and vendor deception into consumer fraud and identity misuse. The 10-minute recording connected Victoria directly to the site, partnerships, and payment offer. Her claim that freelancers acted alone became impossible to maintain. Victoria sued us first. Her complaint alleged defamation, interference with business, emotional distress, and theft of intellectual property. She attached still images from the reception to prove she had publicly launched VOW. Naomi called the filing the most generous evidence packet an opposing party had ever delivered. The hotel counterclaimed for contract fraud and trademark misuse. My employer sought an injunction preventing use of its name and license information. Vendors filed claims for diverted refunds and unauthorized representations. Diane pursued return of account funds and the ring. Caleb provided messages showing Victoria had told him Ethan gave her the heirloom as an engagement gift and would surprise him during the launch. The family divided along predictable lines. Some relatives said Victoria had gone too far, but believed legal action would destroy her future. They asked Ethan to settle privately. He responded that customers and vendors were not private family property. Others focused on my decision to let the presentation continue, calling it a trap. I asked what they believed the trap contained. A microphone Victoria brought, cameras she hired, a website she created, a ring she took, and claims she wrote. Giving someone 10 uninterrupted minutes to execute her own plan was not entrapment. It was the first time the family had stopped interrupting reality to save her from it. Still, I examined my choice. Revenge can become another form of performance, and I did not want to build our marriage around humiliating Victoria. I asked Naomi whether we had crossed a line. She said legal strategy could not answer a moral question. Ethan and I returned to counseling. I admitted there had been satisfaction in watching the screen go dark. Not joy, but relief, sharp enough to resemble it. Our counselor said relief at the end of manipulation was not the same as delight in suffering. The test was what we did next. We could pursue repair and protection, or we could feed the spectacle. We chose the first. We refused interview requests, declined a streaming documentary offer, and asked guests not to circulate raw footage. The hotel released only what was necessary for legal filings. I did not post side-by-side photographs of the dresses, though strangers did. We refunded no one ourselves because doing so could confuse liability, but my agency helped affected brides verify whether they had legitimate coverage. Several vendors honored discounted services for them voluntarily. A local venue provided a replacement date to the woman whose deposit had vanished. Victoria had tried to build a bridal brand through appropriation. The people she deceived built a temporary network through generosity. Discovery revealed that VOW had never possessed meaningful investment. Victoria's lifestyle had been funded by Diane's account, customer deposits, vendor refunds, and credit applications using Ethan's information. Her investor deck valued the company at $12 million, based largely on the hotel partnership and access to my agency. She had promised a photographer equity that did not exist, and told dress manufacturers she had orders from 200 brides. The white gown cost more than Diane had spent on rent during the year Ethan left for college. Victoria had commissioned it before I sent the written dress restriction. The boundary did not provoke her plan. It merely documented that she understood it. There was one detail that hurt Ethan more than the money. In Victoria's messages with her producer, she described him as trained family talent who would defend her once Claire overreacted. She had not simply assumed her brother loved her. She had budgeted his loyalty as an asset. Her launch plan included footage of Ethan comforting her after security intervened, which would position VOW as a brand for women rejected by traditional families. She expected him to leave his bride on their wedding night and manage her crisis because that was what he had always done. Ethan read those messages alone, then showed them to me. He said he finally understood why every boundary had failed. Victoria did not hear boundaries as decisions. She heard them as scenes before the rescue. His repeated returns had taught her that escalation worked. He did not blame himself for her fraud, but he accepted responsibility for the part of the pattern he could change. He blocked direct contact and required all communication through lawyers. Diane objected that siblings should never reduce their relationship to paperwork. Ethan said paperwork was what remained when words had been used without meaning. The criminal case ended without a dramatic trial. Victoria pleaded guilty to identity theft, grand larceny related to the ring and account transfers, and a consumer fraud charge covering the vow payments. Other counts were dismissed under an agreement requiring restitution, probation, community service, and a prohibition on operating financial or event planning businesses during supervision. Because she had no prior convictions and much of the money was recovered, she did not receive the prison sentence some expected. Several people called that lenient. I did not need imprisonment to validate what happened. I needed the record to stop describing it as a family misunderstanding. The civil settlement required her to relinquish Vow's name, domains, customer lists, recordings, and claimed intellectual property. The remaining funds went into a restitution pool. She surrendered the edited wedding footage and all releases bearing my signature. The dress was sold through a consignment auction, with proceeds distributed to affected customers. Online commenters suggested I should buy it and burn it. I did neither. An object did not commit the offense. Somewhere, a bride bought an expensive silk gown at a discount without knowing its history, and I preferred that ending to giving it more ceremonial power. Diane's change was slower and less complete. She began therapy and joined a group for families affected by financial manipulation. At first, she described herself only as a victim. Later, she admitted she had ignored warnings because rescuing Victoria made her feel necessary. She had also relied on Ethan to carry responsibilities she did not want to enforce. Her first apology to him did not ask for forgiveness or access. She named specific events: the rent he paid at 21, the vacation he left early, the girlfriends she asked him to sacrifice, the wedding she nearly begged him to surrender. Specificity made the apology credible. My relationship with Diane did not become close, but it became honest. She visited only when invited. She stopped bringing news about Victoria as a way to pressure us. When she slipped and said her daughter had lost everything over one bad night, I reminded her that the night revealed a year of choices. Diane corrected herself. That mattered more than a grand declaration. Families change through repeated, accurate sentences, not one emotional dinner. Victoria wrote to Ethan 8 months after sentencing. The letter apologized for embarrassing him, but called the launch a dream that grew out of control. She said I had always intimidated her and that wearing white was an attempt to feel equal, not replace me. Ethan did not answer. 6 months later, another letter arrived. This one said she had used his identity because she believed family resources belonged to whoever needed them most, and she had expected him to protect her because he always had. She did not mention me except to acknowledge that my wedding was not hers to use. Ethan replied that accountability was the minimum condition for any future contact, not a ticket guaranteeing it. We celebrated our first anniversary at Juniper House. Marcus gave us the same garden table where we had signed the marriage certificate. The coordinator brought a small cake, and the florist placed 3 white roses in a glass vase. White no longer felt contaminated. Color had never been the real offense. Consent was. Ownership was. The assumption that another woman's joy existed as raw material for Victoria's identity was. People who heard the story often focused on the 10 minutes. They imagined I possessed unusual self-control or a secret appetite for theatrical revenge. The truth was less flattering and more useful. I had wanted to scream. I had wanted security to drag her train through the lobby. I had wanted every guest to turn away the moment she entered. I chose 10 minutes because evidence required patience and because my future mattered more than the immediate satisfaction of stopping her first sentence. Self-control did not make me calm. It allowed me to act while angry without handing my anger control. The title of victim never suited me, but neither did the title of mastermind strangers tried to give me. Naomi designed the legal strategy, hotel staff protected the event, vendors preserved messages. Ethan stood beside me. Diane finally told the truth about the ring. Caleb admitted what he knew. The outcome depended on a group of people refusing to participate in one woman's revised reality. That was the opposite of the family system Victoria understood, where every person waited alone for someone else to confront her. Our wedding photographs tell two different stories. The images from the first 10 minutes of the reception show rigid faces, a white figure beneath a spotlight, and guests looking toward me for permission to react. The rest showed dancing, crooked ties, children asleep across chairs, my father losing a shoe during a song, and Ethan feeding me cake with icing on his sleeve. We kept one photograph that includes Victoria. It is not displayed, but it remains in the complete album. Erasing her would falsely suggest the day was untouched. Letting her image dominate would falsely suggest the day was ruined. 2 years later, I spoke to a young bride through my agency whose wedding vendor had disappeared with several deposits. She apologized repeatedly for not spotting warning signs. I told her expertise does not make a person immune to deception, especially when trust and urgency are deliberately combined. I knew because contracts were my profession, yet someone inside my family had used familiarity to get around the defenses I applied at work. Protection begins not with perfect suspicion, but with records, independent confirmation, and the willingness to act when a pattern emerges. That lesson changed how I understood boundaries. Before Victoria, I thought a boundary was a sentence describing what another person could not do. Now I know it is a decision describing what I will do when they choose to do it anyway. "Do not wear white," was a request. "If you turn our wedding into a commercial launch, the hotel will end the presentation and preserve the evidence," was a boundary. The difference was not harshness, it was reality. Ethan and I eventually had a daughter. We named her Nora, after my grandmother, and promised each other that she would never be assigned responsibility for an adult's emotions. Diane became a careful grandmother. She did not post photographs without asking, did not use gifts to purchase access, and did not demand holidays be organized around her anxiety. Once, when Nora was a baby, Diane began to say that family should always forgive. She stopped herself and changed the sentence. Family should always tell the truth. I saw how much effort the correction cost her. Victoria has never met Nora. That fact is sometimes presented to us as punishment, but it is not. Access to a child is not a medal awarded for biological connection. It is a relationship built through safety. If Victoria completes the work required to become safe and respects that we decide the pace, the future may change. We do not promise it. Boundaries that exist only until someone becomes sad are the same decorations Ethan grew up mistaking for protection. I still encounter the wedding photograph online occasionally. The caption usually says a bride let her sister-in-law steal the spotlight and then destroyed her in 10 minutes. That summary is satisfying but incomplete. I did not destroy Victoria. I stopped protecting the gap between who she claimed to be and what she had done. The business collapsed because it contained no honest structure. The engagement ended because it began with a stolen ring. The family myth broke because too many people finally saw it at once. If I could return to 617, I would make the same choice. I would feel the same fury as that veil crossed my ballroom. I would hold Ethan's hand, watch the clock, and let Victoria speak. At 6:27, I would watch the borrowed logo disappear and our names return to the wall. Then I would take back the microphone, the room, and the rest of my life, not because a spotlight proves who matters, but because no one becomes the bride by wearing another woman's dress. A wedding is not the white fabric, the cameras, or the attention gathered beneath a ceiling. It is the choice two people make about where they will stand when the oldest pattern in the family walks through the door. Ethan stood beside me. I stood beside myself. Victoria had the spotlight for exactly 10 minutes. We kept everything that came after.